Hello everyone, and welcome to another Farah's Carrier Guide. Today we're going to talk about the Enterprise. So further ado, let's go straight into the game. Here she is, CV6 Enterprise, the premium Tier 8 carrier for the United States Navy. So there's a lot of reviews about this ship, and a lot of people already know its strengths and weaknesses, but this is my take on how I would go about setting her up, the guide to use her, and the overall review of what Wargaming has done. So I come into this guide knowing the history of the Enterprise, but not super hyped for it like perhaps some of our American counterparts are. But still, every new carrier to me is an interest, and I, going to play them all quite extensively. So that being said, let's get into it. Enterprise Tier 8. This is now our third Tier 8 carrier, with the fourth one possibly coming soon after. In terms of comparisons with her concealment, she's fairly good. Without a captain that has concealment expert, just a standard camouflage, we can get her sea detection down to 12.7. American counterpart is 15.2, so that's already a big improvement. Shikaku, however, under the same scenario is 10.8. Now, if you do take concealment expert on the captain with the captain skills, and we're going to come to that in a moment, you can get the detectability down to the same as the Shikaku if you want to be slightly more stealthy. But that does involve 4 points with your captain skills. In terms of speed, she is very fast at 34.1 knots. That is with the speed signal. Lexington goes 34.6. Turning circle is a little bit better on the Enterprise, and the Shikaku goes 34 knots as well. So the Enterprise has a slightly better turning circle as well than all the other carriers, and the rudder shifts are more or less the same. Her AA protection, the Enterprise AA protection is probably one of the weakest of the Tier 8 carriers. Now that's offset by the fact that everybody has a defensive fire. The long range guns, i.e. the guns over 85 millimeters, are quite weak at 84 damage. Now this is with the captain's basic fire training and the signal flag on the ship increasing the AA output pushes it to 84. By comparison to Lexington, we have 84 and another 80, so it's practically double, and that's just the long range. The mid tier is 483 and 30. The Enterprise's mid range AA is 126 and 119, so it's not as strong. And note that the defensive fire does not work at the maximum range like cruisers, it works at the mid-range guns, so that's 4.2 kilometers if we're talking about the defensive fire consumable. It's just a small tidbit, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Shikaku has 80 and 27, so it's got slightly stronger combined long-range guns, and it's got roughly, kind of the weaker mid-range, but you want to kind of kill planes at a greater distance, and if you use manual fire AA, then having more DPS on the guns over 85 millimeters makes it better. But this is more of a competitive or rank type thing. In random, CV snipes are less of an issue where you're being pressured by planes because you have your defensive fire ability to panic or reduce incoming damage. In terms of protection, the Enterprise has a 30% bulge protection, so damage mitigation on torps incoming torpedoes. The Shikaku has 27%, and the Lexington only has 18%. So there's already quite a reduced amount of potential damage from torps and destroyers and the like. The Lexington has kind of more armor because it was formerly a battle cruiser. Enterprise doesn't necessarily have that. It's not a amazingly armored ship in any sense of the manner. It doesn't have an armored flight deck like the Taiho, Hakuryu, or Midway, because they came later in the war. It's your standard carrier. You don't want to get shot by things. You don't want to get citadeled by going broadside to battleships at long range, so the concealment helps a little bit with that. So there's no real benefit per se between the different ships. Now, we'll move on to the planes. So one of the ways of balancing the carrier, I guess, Wargaming, is they've given it Tier 7 planes. So we have Tier 7 fighters, Tier 7 torpedo bombers, and a mixture of Tier 7 torpedo and dive bombers. We have high explosive dive bombers, and we have armor piercing dive bombers. Again, this has been talked about a lot. The armor piercing dive bombers do not cause any form of fires, have a reticle which we'll show in our game just after the review. That is different to the standard drop of American dive bombers to date, and it's more elliptical going along the length of the ship size. In terms of the plane numbers, well, the capacity is higher in 96. I mean, the Lexington only has a capacity of 72, and the Shikaku, I believe, is the same. The increased plane capacity is offset very similar to the Kaga, in that lower tier planes you get more of a hangar capacity. In terms of what planes you have in your hangar, the torpedo bombers have about 2 and a bit waves, the dive bombers have 2 and a bit waves, and the fighters have everything else. The exact numbers we'll get into the game. We'll have a look at the reserve capacity. So what's interesting about this is that although it is a 2-2-2, that's 2 fighter waves, 2 torpedo bomber waves, and 2 dive bomber waves ship, which is a really good step in the right direction from American carriers, because at the moment almost all American carriers have really bad ship setups until you get to the Essex and Midway. It's a marked step up against the Lexington, with the Lexington's 111, 013, or 202, which you basically have to choose between lots of fighters and no offense, or no fighters and lots of offense, or a very weak kind of middle ground of 111 where you can't really micro or scout or do anything. So this is a really good step in the right direction for American carriers. The problem is the torpedo bombers don't have a lot of how should we say this, reserve planes. So once you've lost a couple of them, you don't have the ability to use them anymore. And the dive bombers are also somewhat reserved, but there's a lot of fighters. But everything's tier 7, which is kind of awkward. In terms of the health, well, we'll get back to the upgrades, but there is the Air Groups Modification 3, which increases the health of the bombers. That actually makes them more health than the tier 8 counterparts. The torpedo bombers have 1,823 health on the torpedo bomber and 1,727 on the dive bomber. If we have a look at the Lexington, it's 1,796 on the torpedo bomber and 1,764 on the dive bomber. Now, the torpedo bomber has 6 planes in the wave and the dive bomber has 7, whereas the Enterprise, its wave groups by default are 5. So with air supremacy, the fighters and the dive bombers go up to 6 planes in a wave, that is. So the health is fine, and the speed of the planes aren't actually that bad. They're only 3 knots slower between the tiers. So more health, not as fast, but it's only by a small margin, so that's okay. They're not remarkably slower. The fighters are also not that slow. They're 166, I believe, to 169? Yes, knots difference. So there's a 3 knot difference if you're coming across a Lexington. But the problem is the Enterprise bombers and the Lexington bombers, for that matter, are still relatively slow compared to the very fast fighters of the Shikaku, which becomes a bit of a sticking point later when we talk about competitive. The damage output of the Enterprise, well, it's got the same torpedo bombers doing 9,867 damage. The torpedoes themselves are actually, I think they're roughly the same speed, as the Lexingtons, although we don't have the captain skill. Yeah, this particular captain doesn't have torpedo acceleration, which gives us 5 knots. So there's still 39 knots on the torpedoes, and we will talk about the torpedo spread, which is god-awful when we get into our game. Or I will go into the kind of planes details in a moment here after we talk about ship setup and commander skills. So anyway, that is a rough guide there on the plane setup, the healths, the pools. They're not as bad as we think they are, even though they're tier 7. They're still relatively competitive, what with the tier 9-10 module on the ship allowing us to get extra 15% health. The fighters, however, are weaker. They are 1,966 versus the Shikaku's 2,092 hit points, and the Lexington's fighters have a hit value of 2,142. So in terms of planes, the Enterprise has got some of the weaker fighters, but you expect that in tier 7. However, the fact that you've got 6 of them with air supremacy, the barrage strength of the fighters is actually pretty good. The strength for the fighters, it comes down to strafes. When you're engaging with the Lexington and the playstyle, right, you've got 2 fighters. The goal here is you can outmuscle the Shikaku with dogfighting on the captain skills. You can strafe, exit strafe, because you have enough more planes to afford it, and you can counteract using all the advanced fighter skills. If you out micro the enemy carrier, you're not at a huge disadvantage. You don't come across, for example, Saipans in the tier 7 bracket that have 3 fighters frequently. And when you're playing in randoms, you very rarely come across Shukakus, at least in Europe, and to my experience, not in North America either, where they run 3 fighters with 1 torpedo and 2 dive bombers. And when it comes across Lexingtons, sometimes in America come across double fighter Lexingtons, and those are the tricky ones because now you're at a disadvantage because he has really, he's a bigger wave size. He's also got really big DPS, so you have to either out micro him or just play smart and try and stretch his planes out, by flying in different directions or spreading your planes out or using friendly aid, that type of stuff. So the Enterprise can be played to get a lot of plane kills, to get clear skies. When I was using this, numerous games, I'm getting clear skies because I'm basically strafing. It has 4 full strafes worth of ammunition. That's one of the strengths of the fighters. The lower tier, the more ammo you have. So if you see the loadout here, it's 119 loadout. Whereas if we check the Lexingtons, I'm fairly certain it's less. Yeah, it's 101. And the Shukaku's loadout is 60. Oh, that gets confusing. Yeah, let's not read too much into that. The American fighters have always had more ammo. But yeah, the point is, it's a lot of strafes. It's a lot of abilities to strafe into targets, strafe into bombers, exit strafe away from fighters. Just use strafes a lot on the Enterprise. It's the same mechanic to an extent on the Saipan. You don't want to be clicking on planes with a Saipan because the hero will beat you with dogfighting. You want to always be strafing. Now, the Enterprise doesn't get the free disengage exit strafe. You will lose a plane, but since you've got plane waves of 6, you can afford to do that once or twice, provided you're exiting just as your second wave comes in and strafes the enemy planes. And don't be afraid to exit strafe into bombers while you're fighting another fighter and that type of thing. So really good fighter micro. If you're really good with your fighter micro in the Enterprise, it rewards you a lot, and you can get 60 plane kills in the game easy and get clear skies. The torpedo bombers, as we said, they've got a really bad drop pattern. It's a W shape. You've got the front row, which is 3 very wide torpedoes, and then the back row, between the 3, you've got another 2 torpedo drop. Everyone has talked about this already to death. It's very, very horrible. You have to think of the torpedo bombers as realistically being as good as 1 wave from, say, the Lexington, 6 planes. If you are fortunate, you can hit with these torpedoes 6 out of 10. If you're good, you can get 6 out of 10. If you know your approach, if you know your angles and your approach coming across tier 9s and 10s, okay, if you're the bottom tier in the game, then you want to, as I've shown in the other carry guides, minimize your time inside the enemy's AA bubble, not come at them from behind. You want to come at them from a 90-degree angle towards their nose, and if you aim slightly at an angle when you're coming in at them from behind, or a 90-degree angle, you can connect 2 or 3 torps. Frequently, I only hit with 4 torpedoes, 2 per wave. Sometimes I can get 5 or 6 torpedoes, but rarely, only once I think I got 8 out of 10 on a single target. Your damage does not come from the torpedo bombers. They come from your dive bombers, and torpedo bombers are more of a conundrum because you want to get that flooding damage in, but therein lies the weakness, which we'll come to with the dive bombers, because they don't do fires. The dive bombers, and here's the annoyance about the Enterprise and where it kind of falls flat. The dive bombers, the high explosive dive bombers are the same as the Rangers. So you're using tier 7 dive bombers in terms of less damage HE, only £500 to £1,000, and they've got the same spread reticle as the Ranger, okay? And that's kind of weak, especially with 2 of them and with fewer planes as well, 6 to 7. And yes, you can, the problem is you can't reliably hit destroyers or cruisers with the current reticle of the dive bomber that you get for the Americans, because it's too inaccurate. The Japanese dive bombers can reliably hit destroyers and they can force fire, so you can hit cruisers, and you're not there to do damage, you're there to cause a damage over time, which you can work in with your torpedo bombers later, so you're forcing a damage control party, in come the torpedo bombers, and you get that juicy damage from the flooding. So the American ones are not reliable enough to hit. Whereas the dive bombers, they are reliable to hit because they're elliptical, and they're very good at hitting larger targets like battleships. And on German battleships, they do colossal amounts of damage, and that is where you get your main strength. There's a lot of people playing German battleships, and this is why the ship works, because there are lots of German battleships to get damage off of. the dive bombers are practically useless on almost every other ship. They either overpen, or they don't do enough damage, or they don't activate, and you get anemic levels of damage. And the fact that torpedo bombers can't connect with a lot of bomb hits either is just really awkward. Plus, with the dive bombers flying right on top of the enemy target, you can expect to suffer quite a lot of losses, especially if it's a high AA ship, such as an Iowa or a Montana. And this is compounded with the fact that torpedo bomber wave, the whole point of torpedoes is that it gives you the flexibility to not only go after battleships, the sort of main target of carriers. You can use torpedoes, specifically 2 waves, and this is why the Enterprise is a good step in the right direction compared to, say, the Lexington that only has 1 torpedo bomb wave, or every other ship on the American line except from the Saipan that only has 1 torpedo bomb wave. Is you can cross drop. If a ship is trying to turn away, you can drop with 1 torp to force the turn and drop with another torp to guarantee the hit, or you can cross drop destroyers, or you can basically catch them out. And that's the Japanese strength. They can use their multiple torpedo bombers to catch destroyers or cruisers on top of battleships, right? Well, the American spread is so bad that the torpedo bombers have a very hard time against a competent ship to hit destroyers or cruisers that are very maneuverable, and they can't get a lot of hit connections even on the Americans, so they can't do a lot of damage. And the dive bombers, which are your main source of damage, well, they now have problems because they are only good against German battleships. They're useless against destroyers and cruisers. So the Enterprise is a very niche target market. Whereas the Japanese one, you could go after literally anything, depending on the scenario of the game. The American one is only really effective against big targets, and then German battleships on top of that. It can't snipe enemy carriers particularly well unless you choose in advance to take high explosives. The flooding mechanic on the torpedoes is fine, but you have nothing to follow it up on. You only have 2 sources of a single damage over time state. You only have flooding. If you take the AP, which is your main damage course, you don't get fires. And because you don't get fires, you can't mix the fires and the flooding to force a damage con on your target and then follow it with more damage. It's all Alpha Strike. So this is where the Shokaku doesn't have as much Alpha Strike, but you can damage over time. You can sort of force a damage con, apply a double fire, a flooding, and that does way more damage over time. And it's the same with the Lexington. If you played Strike Lexington, you wouldn't attack with everything at once. You would force some fires, maybe force a flooding, wait for the damage con, follow up with some more. And you just keep bleeding them again and again and again, and that does a lot more damage. The Enterprise can't do that, and because it can't do that, it will find a very difficult time sniping an enemy carrier at full health, or taking down an enemy battleship at full health. And because the lack of damage from overpens on cruisers and destroyers, your dive bombers are not going to be hurting them, and your torpedo bombers will be lucky if you can get 2 torps, or even any torp, on a very fast destroyer that's coming and chasing you down. So this is where the American carriers kind of fall flat, and it's quite awkward and frustrating. I think if the best solution here, and we'll come back to the conclusion about this, is some working on the torpedo bomber spread, or giving us some flexibility between the dive bombers. But we'll come back to that. Let's go through the ship upgrade setup. For consumables, I always take damage control party 2 for faster reloading from under attack, and I take defensive fire AA2 to give me a second charge of the consumables if I need it. Under upgrades, because we have a lot of fighters, we want to boost the fighters up as much as possible, so we take air groups mod 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2 gives us more damage for aircraft guns. Number 2 is absolutely massive because it gives our fighters health, and it also gives us a huge chunk of ammunition. The third upgrade, which is unique to tier 9 and 10 ships, is now also being given to the Enterprise. The 15% health to attack aircraft is absolutely mandatory. There's nothing else you have to take here, and this must be bought before you even start playing, but otherwise your planes will just melt in a higher tier game. Then it's just the standard setup of reducing the chance of you putting on fire and flooding, reducing the time that you are on fire and flooding, and then reducing your concealment. And that's the standard upgrade setup path on the ship. It's fairly rudimentary. Everyone will have told you have done the same thing if you've read any of their reviews. Under the captain skills, there are a number of choices here, so I'm probably going to give you some options, and you can decide how you want to go forth, alright? So, the standard pattern, we take aircraft servicing expert because, well, it's like a really good skill, the health of your planes and reducing the service time. It's the go-to skill. Dogfighting is also mandatory because we're using tier 7 planes against tier 8 planes. We've got to have dogfighting to be competitive against either Lexington or Shokaku fighters. The next skill in the tier bracket, well, there's basically only two skills that are really helpful for the carriers. One is we could take expert rear gunner, but these days everybody strafes, nobody necessarily clicks on bombers, so the extra damage to your rear gun of your bombers is more or less useless, which means torpedo acceleration. American torpedoes are very slow at 34 knots, so you got to take torpedo acceleration because it's the only way you're legitimately going to hit some fast cruisers and the very fast destroyers. And what other skill are you going to take? Not really any. In the 3 pocket, this is where it gets confusing because the 3 pocket or level of skills and the 4 kind of work together with each other. Because you have torpedo bombers, you can take torpedo armor and expertise, and this means that the torpedo bombers will be ready when the game starts for you to take them off, then have the fighters take off after the torpedo bombers, and by the time you get to the capture point, the speed of the fighters will have caught up with their torpedo bombers, so now you've got your first strike out there with torpedo bombers, theoretically to go after a destroyer, cruiser, or anything going for a cap point, and your fighters are there at the same time. That's the advantage of taking torpedo armor and expertise, and then obviously, as you go throughout the battle, your bombers turn around at a faster rate. However, the Enterprise doesn't have that many torpedo bombers, and the spread is pretty terrible, so you could be justified if you didn't want to take torpedo armor and expertise. Basic fire training is handy because it increases your AA armament. Now, you can argue that you can get away with that because you're relying on your defensive fire. Not many people go after a carrier snipe, so again, you could also drop basic fire training. In the 4th skill bracket, air supremacy is absolutely mandatory because we need that extra fighter to be competitive in the skies, and the extra dive bomber is really good if we're using our AP dive bombers because, well, it's just going to do way more damage, and then if you're using HE, then there's just an extra chance of dropping a bomb and getting HE. The advanced fire training, on this particular captain, you could choose between advanced fire training and manual fire control for AA armament, because the manual fire control for AA armament affecting guns over 85mm would work quite well on the ship's long-range guns, which are the 85mm and higher, and because of AFT it's up to 6 kilometers. And that would double the damage of the 84. However, this particular captain that I'm using is intended for use on the Essex and the Saipan. So because the Saipan doesn't have high caliber AA guns, I don't take the manual fire control for AA armament. I take basic fire training and advanced fire training because the Saipan is vulnerable to snipes without defensive fire, so I want to boost up that AA. And this is a perfectly viable self-defense mechanic for the Enterprise because you push your Bofor guns up to 4.2 kilometers, which is your defensive fire range, so you're panicking further away from your ship, making sure that it has an impact on the enemy planes. And the basic fire training just increases the odds of particularly killing them. Now, you could drop the basic fire training and just have the advanced fire training to push up your defensive fire, and then with the 3 points from basic fire training and then an extra skill point if you have a 19-point captain, you could take concealment expert. And concealment expert would reduce the carrier's profile down to 10.7 or so kilometer range, or 10.8, something along that line, and that would put it on the same level as Shikaku, and you could get much closer, or you know, there's less odds of you being spotted by a destroyer. Now, that can be offset because the bigger the profile you are, the more likely you know incoming bombers or incoming destroyer that you're spotted, and you can call for teams to support you. Right now, in this current setup, the 19th point for me would go into prior to target. Alternatively, if you don't value the torpedo bombers as much, but you value the self-defense with the AA because you're going to use this on another ship, or you're also going to use it on the Saipan, or you're going to use it on a ship that's tier 7 and lower, then maybe you want to keep the basic fire training and the advanced fire training, but you want to drop torpedo armor and expertise because you feel the torpedoes aren't that great. And then with the 19th point, that gives you 4, you could take manual fire control for AA armament, and then that basically turns into our Shikaku's all AA defense competitive build. Or you could drop the torpedo armor and expertise and then use the 19th point, and then like I have on my Midway captain, we take concealment expert instead to reduce the concealment of the ship if you want to be slightly more stealthy. So there's a number of ways to do this. The basic skills that you do need is aircraft servicing, dogfighting, torpedo acceleration, air supremacy. How you play around with the remaining skills are up to you because it depends what other ship you're playing with. But I do recommend the advanced fire training. Concealment expert's up to you if you like that playstyle a bit, getting closer. Basic fire training is good for any ship tier 7 or lower to kind of help avoid those snipe attempts. And if you do use the Saipan, for example, then Torpedo Armament Expertise is very good to swap the captain back and forth, because I play Saipan with 2 fires, 2 torpedo bombers. So that's captain skills. Quick chat then about ranked and competitive. Is this ship viable in ranked or competitive? The brutal answer, no, it is not viable in ranked and competitive. And the reasons are quite simple. The health pool of the Enterprise's 6 fighter planes is 1,966. The health pool of the Shokaku's fighter planes is 2,092. Ignoring a fighter duel in a straight up click the enemy fighter duel, the Enterprise is probably going to win. That is not including strafe mechanics and hostile anti-air. When you do include hostile anti-air, the Enterprise is going to suffer more because its planes are lower tier, has less health, which means the planes are going to die faster. This also now has a problem where if we are in a scenario in competitive where we used to use our fighters to scout, we are sending tier 7 fighters into tier 8 anti-air, and it's going to get shot down quicker than the Shokaku's fighter planes are. Because they have less health, they're going to get picked off. Now we have the other problem, the dive bombers. The dive bombers for the Enterprise are slower. They're 137 knots. The torpedo bombers are even slower still, 133 knots. Where's the and then also we add that the fighter speed is only 166. Well, if we look at the Shokaku, the dive bombers are actually really fast on the Shokaku. So the Shokaku, when it's running 312 or even 222 in competitive or ranked, if it comes across a fighter-heavy opponent, or maybe it needs to not use its dive bombers, the Shokaku this is, for offensive-based, it can drop the payload on the dive bombers and go scout with the dive bombers, and there's enough reserve, 3 waves each wave on the Shokaku, that it can send out the dive bombers and it can scout. At 161 knots, it's going to be quite... I don't even think they can. The speed is so fast compared to this tier 7 fighters. The tier 7 fighters will not catch the dive bombers. They'll be flying circles for days and you'll never catch them. And then you'd have to use your 2 fighters to corner them and maybe kind of pick them off, and then why are your fighters doing that? You're totally giving up the rest of the battle. So the Shokaku can continue to do damage with the torpedo bombers, it can scout with the dive bombers, and the fighters kind of remain competitive in 2 fighters and even more when it's 3. The Enterprise, if it sacrifices its dive bombers to go scout, that means you're not really using your AP dive bombers, which is your main damage source. So you would think, well, can I then scout with my rubbish torpedo bombers? And the answer is no, because they're even slower at 133 knots. The 171 knot Japanese fighters are going to eat these guys all day long. Even if you drop your payload, you're still not fast enough. The guys are going to catch you, or it's going to be like a straight up race where you're only just maybe sort of at the same speed, but it'll be a much easier job for the Japanese one to catch you or strafe to catch up to your planes and kill them off. And then the other problem is that the Enterprise runs 222, Shokaku runs 312. And in a competitive, in competitive scenarios, the third fighter is extremely powerful in terms of the flexibility of the strafe mechanics, and then just the wide ability to scout more of the map, or to kind of dominate air control, which you can't do in the Enterprise. And it's not even worth talking about Lexington because that's a piece of garbage. So these are the kind of problems. If there was another tier 8 rank season, would the Enterprise work? Possibly. It really depends how many German battleships are on the enemy team and how well you can get dive bomb hits in, and if the enemy Shokaku is going 222, and whether or not you can out-bomb the enemy Shokaku. If he went 312 or the meta was heavy fighters, then it's on you to get damage in while with your large plane reserves basically out-fighting with your fighters. So in ranked, you can argue that down if 2 players of equally high skill, the Enterprise is going to be competitive, but it doesn't have the same flexibility as the Shokaku. The Shokaku can bomb, it can scout, it can fighter control, and when it chooses to bomb, it's not limited to a limited selection of ships. It can bomb anything it wants to, whereas the Enterprise can't bomb everything it wants to. It's stuck with its few good ships that it can bomb, you know? So that's why it's not good in ranked and it's not good in competitive. But in randoms, hell yes, it's actually very fun. Everyone plays German battleships, go bomb them, get huge amounts of damage. I frequently get over 100,000 damage in my games, and I get a lot of plane kills. But that is probably because I'm playing against slightly weaker opponents. If I was to play against a person of my own caliber and skill, I would probably struggle a little bit. So then, into conclusion, this carrier, who's it for? Should I buy it? Well, it's expensive. It's an expensive tier 8 ship. It costs you a lot of money. By comparison, it's probably 4 months of premium that you could have in terms of doubloon cost, or maybe a little bit more than that. How are you going to play it a lot? Well, if you're a fanboy or you really like the Enterprise, yeah, I suppose you could get it, but you're jumping straight into the tier meta. Are you good enough for this? This is not a low-scale carrier. This is a high-scale carrier to get the maximum benefit of it. You're at a disadvantage with the health and the speed of your fighters, but with the advantage of the ammunition and the strength of the strafes, if you are very good with fighter micro on this ship, you can make the fire control work and you can dominate the skies. But this involves really good fighter micro control, knowing when to strafe, when not to strafe, when to stay away from AA, not straying too far, exit strafing, tagging, outplaying the enemy carrier. These are all very important skills to make the most out of the Enterprise. New players can't necessarily be expected to know this, especially with tier 4-5 carriers not having the alt attack or the strafe mechanic for them to learn with. In terms of the torpedo bombers, they're tier 7, even with the health increase, which makes them more than the Lexingtons, they still get eaten up by like tier 9 and 10 ships. You can only realistically get multiple guaranteed hits on big, long ships, and even then, it's easy for them to turn away. With the perfect approach, really skilled player who knows what they're doing and comes in, you might get 4 or 6 out of 10 torpedo connections. Anything more than that is astonishing, you did a great job. And then, yes, against potatoes, you can cross-drop destroyers and cruisers and you could maybe get a kill, but against a really highly skilled destroyer captain or cruiser captain, he is going to dodge them or just take one torp and survive and escape. Whereas in the Shikaku or in something along those lines, you're pretty much going to get a kill or you're going to take away like 90% of his health if you play perfectly. If you play perfectly on the Enterprise, you're still not necessarily guaranteed to get a kill with the torpedo bombers. And then the dive bombers, well, they're useless other than like certain ships like the Moskva and the German battleships at the moment. The high explosive is too inaccurate. The torpedo bombers are too widespread to be effective. What bugs me is that it's no skill involved whatsoever for risk reward with the dive bombers. You just click on the enemy ship, left click, you don't even have to manual aim, drag the outside reticle so that it's aiming over the ship that you're looking at, and then the bombs drop and you get 40k damage with 2 dive bomber waves on a German ship. 40 to 50k damage, boom, like that. And that's a huge amount of alpha strike, but only on a few select ships. It's hit and miss with the Enterprise. That's what bugs me about it. And as we say, it's not ranked. It's not really competitive in ranked and competitive gameplay, or at least I wouldn't take it. You could try and get a ship composition where you might be able to bring it in and maybe use its plane reserves to an extent, but it's just not as good as Shikaku. The Shikaku is still the benchmark of the tier 8 carrier. So we've talked about the ship long enough for about over half an hour. Let's actually go into a game and try it out. In this particular instance, we have entered a tier 8, 9, 10 game, so we're already down in tier. We're bottom tier. However, we see some Bismarcks and our Friedrichs de Gross. These are perfect targets for our dive bombers. There's quite a few destroyers, but we can't really cross-drop them that well. So our strike is going to be pretty much on the... Well, hold that thought. As we were saying, you can't really strike the other ships, so we're going to do everything we can on the German battleships. And the Lexington, well, it depends. Does he have fighters? Does he not have fighters? Is he strike? Is he 1-1-1? We can probably, with good micro control, outplay him with our fighters. But in this particular instance, I'm going to use the torpedo bombers first because I've got torpedo armor and expertise, which means they're going to be ready first. And then after that, I'll immediately have the fighters ready to go. But I'm not going to load the dive bombers because I don't want them getting in the way. As soon as the fighters join the queue, then I'll tell the dive bombers to take off. There we go. If we see that a player's messed up, he's got himself out of position, then we might try and drop him. The Hippers might not have a defensive fire. He might have hydro, because he's a German ship, and in that case we might be able to drop him, get some damage in. We're not necessarily going to kill him, but a bit of damage is nice. But ultimately we are looking to crush any of these German battleships, and at the same time deny the enemy Lexington from basically doing anything productive in this game. So it's the standard bow, base defense. Don't really expect the enemy teams to be doing anything like pushing particularly hard. So I'm not going to rush straight in with my planes to spot with the torpedo bombers, because the plane reserves are actually quite limited. See how we have only 15 reserve torpedo bombers, 16 reserve dive bombers, but 31 reserve fighters. So if we're going to do anything, we'll do it with the fighters. But we'll do it slowly in case I can pull back. Alright, we already see where the Bismarck is, so that's going to be our target. The odds of him having a defensive fire cruiser next to him are quite low. So the Zhao's there. And there's the Yugumo. I am also thinking, where's the enemy Lexington's planes? Because we haven't seen them yet, right? If they don't appear in any moment now, we have to take into consideration that we might be attacked. Alright, there they are. That's 2 fighters, 3? No, he's strike. So we know he's strike. We don't need to necessarily worry about that just yet. So we've got Bismarck, Friedrich. We're waiting for the Zhao to move out of the way. Zhao's pulling back. The Bismarck's possibly becoming a target. He could turn away. So the Zhao can't do a defensive fire, but the gearing could do a defensive fire. So we're just gonna... There we go. So he's launched his fighter, which is fine, because we'll keep the... We're gonna go for the approach. Oh, somebody's popped a defensive fire on us, I think. So 20k and 5 torpedoes, not bad. See how much we wounded him? And then we'll pull back. Stayed inside the areas as little as possible, and the Bismarck is pretty salty. And he's right, he's right to be salty, because we did a colossal amount of damage on him, took a huge amount of his health, didn't kill him off, but if he was wounded we would have killed him. And we've got ourselves 61k and an alpha strike. Now he's used his damage con on the flooding, and anyone else who can get HE on him is probably going to burn him out. Now we see incoming dive bombers, so we're going to try and strafe these. Nope. There we go. Well done. It's a powerful strafe. It's more powerful than the Shikaku's one because of the extra plane, and just it does a lot of damage. The damage per plane is less, but the fact that we have more planes means that our strafe damage is quite high. Currently the game is going reasonably well. The Bismarck on the enemy team has been smoked up by the gearing, so he's going to survive a little bit more. You'd have to think with the strength of ships we've got at the moment, we're going to be in a positive situation, although I'm going to basically keep my fighters close for the time being, because I know the enemy Lexington can't bomb anytime soon because he lost all his planes, and we're going to look for torpedoes incoming, specifically anything the gearing might fire at our ships, although I can see that Hydro's up on our Bismarck, so that might not be necessary. Alright, we'll get the bombers off. We could go for this Bismarck, zappers. We could try and finish off the first Bismarck we attacked, but there's a Montana nearby, so you know what? I'm not entirely thrilled about going that close. I don't need to go this quickly that fast. So it's a game of patience at the moment. We're just looking for anything that becomes isolated or has low health. This Hindenburg, well, if he's got good AA, he could be bombed by the Lexington, but I think he can take care of himself, so I'm not really going to send a fighter over there to defend him. This Friedrich in the middle, though, is a prime target for enemy bombers, so we're going to stay around him, and also this Montana, because there's no one else that can give AA defense. Also, because of T7 planes, I'm not sending the planes individually. I'll send them in pairs, or I'll send them all at the same time, making it harder for the enemy target, or friendly ships for that matter as well, to focus down the planes one at a time. Oh, that's not great. That Bismarck is still being a nuisance in the smoke. So that guy we almost killed is being allowed to have more of an impact on the game. We assume that this Bismarck... we could go for the Iowa, I suppose, help our Hindenburg out. Oh, Yeah, the little bomber's going for him, so let's go help. Or we could go for this Bismarck. And you know what? I think we'll go for the Bismarck. Oh, the Hipper's in the way, actually. No, we'll go for the Iowa. Even though we know our bombers aren't going to do as much damage, we will definitely go for the Iowa. We might torpedo bomb the Hipper, but for the time being, we'll go for the Iowa. So, click our target, line up our dive bombers. See how the high AA targets are melting our planes. That's not bad. That's not bad as well. Not a huge amount of damage, especially compared to what we did before. We only did about 10k damage. Oh, hello. Right, now we're going to have to do something about this Akizuki chasing us from behind. And this is the problem. We've got torpedo bombers, but it's very awkward to get the spread in. Well, actually, what we'll do is, since he can't see our planes, we're looking for his gunfire. He probably doesn't see, which means, which is why he's not firing at the moment. We could theoretically drop him in the smoke. And by the way, that's another reason why having your primary damage focused torpedo bombers is better than dive bombers, is that if you watch where they're firing from, or you can guess their rough estimated location, you can drop in smoke. So the way I'm going to approach this is to drop torpedoes from behind. Although he's constantly turning, making this somewhat obnoxious. These guys are out of position. And these guys are bad as well. Lost too many planes here, so he's just going to turn out. And then if I try and drop him from the other side... Maybe he's turning hard left. We might get him, but the spread is so wide. Maybe one? Alright, maybe one. Fair enough. Right, we can't lose focus on the rest of the game, though. So the Frager should deal with him. If we keep him spotted, his smoke has been used. The secondaries from the Frager should be fine. If we spot any incoming torpedoes from the Z-46, the battleship should be able to react to that. That's the only way he can win this duel. And we'll keep our other fighter near our Montana, just in case the enemy CV tries to, attack our Montana. In terms of points, the Z-46 is denying us points, but as soon as he's pushed out, we'll start gaining points again. And also, the rest of the team's doing a relatively good job. They're not necessarily committing suicide, which is great. There is still 2 German battleships left over. There's one, Zappers, and there's another one, Chiller. So, oh well, our Montana just went down. I know I'm not spotting, but I need to try and get over to help our Friedrich, otherwise he's going to die a horrible death from the Lexington. Because we're trying to spot for him. And he's dead. How much health's the Iowa got? Yeah, actually, Iowa's quite low, so we're going to go dive bomb him off before he can get any extra health regenerated. And we'll send the torpedo bombers back for the destroyer so the rest of the team can help out. So 8k, ship his health healing. Yep. So he's turning away, so we're going to go across the nose, and then we're going to drop on his nose. He's actually making this quite hard, so we're going to send one over to the other direction. Go like that, anticipating the turn. And, oh, that's a bad... That's annoying. And by using your fighters having to scout, it's making this awkward because he's able to get some of these bombers in. We're not on the front line where we should be. And the dive bombers, they did nothing to the Iowa. He's going to survive. The torpedo bombers are required for that. Alright, I'll keep one dive bomber out for the time being. If we can deal with these 2 guys, 3 guys back here, then we're doing in a good shape. I mean, our destroyers are harassing their battleships and they're not really getting anything productive done, you know, in that sense. I'll keep this 1 dive bomber out here to spot if the DD leaves the smoke, but also to see if any torpedo bombers, torpedoes, ship torpedoes come out. This Iowa, we want to make sure he just doesn't harass our team or get long-range pot shots, which is why we're just going to kill him. We might lose a bunch of planes, but it's worth it. Wow, our team is totally failing here. Seems a shame to waste these bombers on a 68 health ship, but so be it. Okay, so did the... Oh, and the destroyer in the south is dead. Alright. Now the problem is our destroyers are so isolated, I can't actually go up and prevent the spot. And the Montana's in the way as well, and in terms of spare bombers, we're actually okay with spare bombers. Hipper should die to the ships that we have currently in our base, but I can't save the destroyers because they're so isolated. The German battleships, however, provided they don't clump up, if we wait for our basically our other ships to be finished, we could alpha strike them. We could probably take down this health of this guy. And therein lies the problem of being so far isolated. So we're going to go up and around. We're doing what we can. Maybe we should attack this Hipper and guarantee the kill. Because we are quite far above points and it's in 6 minutes to go. I mean, the main damage is going to be from... So normally if this is a Japanese ship, Hipper would be dead. If there's no defensive fire, Hipper would be dead instantly. I'm going to keep the alt up to see if he defensive fires. He hasn't. He's already killed a plane and another one. I think I'm going to have to drop early soon, otherwise I'm going to lose all the planes. Oh man, this is a terrible spread. Look at this, he can just turn away. Maybe the ships can long range shoot him. This is where you need the cross drop, because you have to anticipate the fact he's going to turn, and you can... So he turns broadside. I'm going to have to spot him again with fighters. But we're going to dive bomb the Frigers here. So it's just the limitations of the Enterprise are being shown. We'll also use the... Oh, hello. Okay, so we found his Batcraft. I still have a bit of time. I'm just going to basically line these guys up perfectly. Huge damage on the Friedrich. I'm turning my ship away. I'm turning the defensive fire on. Going back to the torpedo bombers. He's not going particularly fast, so try and get as much as we can in. Okay. Instant repair. 2 torps, 3 torps, flood. There we go, killed. But it's only because it was a German. You know, it was a German ship that we could do that. I don't want to click on it, I want to strafe it. I don't like this constant blind focus on this guy. The oh my god. I'm gonna probably die now to a gearing push. These guys are... ignore the... CA... I'm gonna spot the gearing. I'm gonna wait this time, not send one torpedo. I'm gonna try and wait for the second torpedo group and then attack the gearing. And if anything, I'll try and force the Gearing to use his smoke or give the Dawn Squad the ability to hit it. That's the Torpedo's ready, and I'm going to load I've got no spares as well, which is a problem now. The dive bombers will be more effective on the Bismarck, so we'll hit the Bismarck as hard as we can, and then we just have to pray the Montana doesn't somehow wreck us all. I'm concerned that the Montana might broadside me. I don't know if I'm being targeted or not because I don't have priority targets because I don't have the 19th, but yeah, it's actually firing at me. I can see the shells incoming. This could be dead. So if that's the case, I'm going to tell it to auto bomb just in case I die from these shells incoming now. Nope. So we're going to tell them not to do this anymore. Really do with a little bit. Oh, he's got a defensive fire. Oh, so much. We'll wait, be patient. I kind of have to point at the... DD that's spotting me. So if they kill the DD... oh wow, look at that. Killed all those planes as well. Come on, dude. And our Iowa doesn't have any support as well because I have to spot this guy. That's great. It's turning out to be an awkward game, and he dies. It's marvelous, that is. Theoretically, we could kill him here. Yep. We have to fly around the Montana though, and the Montana's now way in detection, so we are screwed. Montana has a lot of health as well, so I guess we have no other option but to try and attack him with our torpedo bombers. We're sort of bow attacking at the moment, I guess, which is a really bad idea. We're gonna have to drop from like really long range here, and we have to turn nose on so they can only use these nose guns. They're gonna die to his AA, so we need to do something about it. And I'm gonna send this guy to spot, see if the DD comes out, and I guess I'll send the fire along and around. Oh my goodness, this is gonna be interesting. I still need to turn nose on. I'm dead. Oh, what? No, it's not me. Oh, holy shit. All right, secondaries, go, 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 go. Oh, this is awkward. Oh, he's gonna fire at any moment now. Come on, fires. Ah, he come. Oh wow, that's crazy, man. Unfortunately we lose because the game clock goes down, but that was stressful. And this is the problem, I can't kill ships, destroyers that flank and push me, and I have to spot them with the fighters, and then the enemy Lexington gets more hits in, you know? Awkward. Anyway, that is the Enterprise for you. I've played probably 30-40 games in the ship so far. We got quite a few plane kills, we got a couple of torp hits, we got quite a few dive bomb hits. You saw how incredibly effective it was going after the German battleships. If we went after the German battleships, we did some good damage. If we went after anything else, such as the Iowa, it was just weak. It really didn't do a lot of damage, and we wasted time going after that particular Iowa. The drop pattern was so weak, we couldn't realistically hit one of the enemy hipper either. The fires are pretty good, the barrage is very good when we can defend our ships, if they don't all go in separate directions on a large map, and we can do good strafe damage, so the fighters are perfectly capable, but the inability to take on destroyers, the Akizuki that pushed in south, or the gearing that was attacking us at the end, the inability to self-defend yourself really hurts. And it was only good because they had 2 German battleships at the end of those last 3 ships. If those were any other nation, we're screwed, because we can't do the same amount of damage to them. We absolutely annihilated 2 full health battleships, or 2/3 health battleships, with our dive bombers. And that's kind of the Enterprise in a nutshell. It's very good in a niche scenario. It's exceptionally good in a niche scenario. It's good for fighters, good for dive bombing, but outside of that, it's tricky. It just can't do some things, and it needs good team cohesion. It'd be very good for division play and random play, but I wouldn't take it into ranked, I wouldn't take it in competitive, and unless you're very skilled with carriers and have a high skill point captain to boot, I probably would not buy this ship. I would wait for something like the Graf Zeppelin, or buy the Saipan, because that's very noob friendly. Yeah. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next review.